Thank you, Anne. Thanks so much. Anne is doing just a tremendous job of helping out with these as well as on our digital marketing and other responsibilities. So thanks so much, Anne. Want to say thank you for joining us this week for our COVID market update, kind of measuring and tracking the impact of the pandemic on the residential real estate market. I'm still David Arbit. I am Mars Director of Research, and I'd like to thank our sponsors, as we do every week, for their support. So much thanks goes to Bell Bank Mortgage, as well as our friends at North Star MLS, RCU, Royal Credit Union, formerly Realtors Credit Union, and SupraKey. All right, down to business. Before we actually get down to business, I know we say this every week, but it's true. The only thing that really matters is that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy, and hopefully not getting too stir crazy and managing to stay sane. I also want to mention we have a COVID page, mplsrealtor.com/coronavirus resources. You'll also notice it's kind of right there on our homepage as soon as you log in, as soon as you get on our homepage. Just a few examples of what you'll see there. Good info on our business operations, hours, and different measures we're taking to keep you guys and us safe. One of my favorite, you'll see the local housing market updates, where a lot of my work is filed away. Education, our EPD team's doing a great job of getting classes up and running for you guys and working with the DOC, the Department of Commerce, to allow virtual CE. I know sometimes the polls can be challenging, but it's sort of the only way that we have to ensure compliance. Eric is doing a great job working on our government activity and sort of what's happening in the public sector. I'll skip forward to another one of my favorite places is our weekly webinars, and you are here. We are here. Okay, so data is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Therefore, by the virtues of the transitive property, data equals power. So, I don't usually get philosophical, but especially in these times, you can ask 100 agents what's happening out there, and you'll probably get 100 different market realities. And that is why, along with a lot of other reasons, why we feel so committed to providing facts and impartial and objective analysis. So it's really something that we're committed to. And it's you guys as members are first and foremost, but the media really picks up on this stuff. Other industry partners, Housing First, the builders. We've actually been in communication with the Federal Reserve, who really loves our stats. So this stuff really is having an impact. A little bit of how things are going to go. If we have time, we'll jump into InfoSparks, but I want to say, we're going to start with showings. We'll pivot into buyer activity, mostly contracts, maybe a little bit of closings, but mostly signed contracts, sort of that early leading indicator. We'll be talking seller activity, new listings, also active listings. We'll do a little bit of a comparison of, year over year for March versus year over year for April. We'll also have some week to week change that we've been tracking for you guys. And we'll obviously spend a lot of time talking price ranges, because the market is not a monolith. What's happening in the market in the $200,000 to $300,000 segment can be very different than what's happening in the $800,000 to $1 million segment. So we're gonna kind of respect those differences and really call them out. Okay, so everything still depends on three things: the length of the pandemic, the impact of unprecedented levels of stimulus, and this consumer response. How will consumers react? How will they change their spending and their behavior, and so on? So sort of an easy visual, I guess, a little bit of a tug of war. Here's COVID pulling this way. Here's our policymakers, our Federal Reserve leaders, as well as our scientific community and our public health experts, and those working toward a vaccine and make sure that we follow measures that keep everyone safe, especially vulnerable populations. So things do move and change fast, don't they? Had I told you back in January that a bottle of Purell or Lysol spray would be worth more than a barrel of oil, you probably would have told me I'm crazy. And yet here we are. So here we are, 2020, written by Stephen King, directed by Quentin Tarantino. Marty, I just came back from 2040 and they still have unused teepee from 2020. So brace yourselves. It's not winter, but data analysis is coming. Okay, let's start with the market. Get ready for a fun data adventure. So here we go with showings. We can see pretty clearly when activity sort of, its previous peak for the year or its previous maximum that we reached for the year for showings. Again, that was sort of early March. We saw the downturn mid-March. And then this is pretty interesting. We sort of got back toward normal, or we really started increasing in mid-April. So almost a month to the day, we started to see that turnaround. This is really encouraging. This is an encouraging trend. You guys can see we're actually above. We've reached a new high for the year in terms of showings. So after we came down fairly sharply, we also rose fairly sharply, and we are ahead of where we were at the previous peak. So showings have reached an all-time high for the year, at least MLS-wide, based on a rolling weekly average. So pretty encouraging chart here. I know we did this last week. Just if anyone's new on the webinar, I want to just cover this again. So we saw that early rebound or snapback, and now we're kind of getting into what I think of as a more natural or sustainable growth rate. And interestingly enough, there's nice consistency here with the trend we're on now versus the trend we saw before the virus kind of took hold and really started impacting our market. So, all right, I got some real things to consider here, and I suppose I have some funny things to consider. Have some of these health concerns passed? Maybe for some, for others, not so much. Are rates too good to pass up? I'm hearing people are getting 3.25, 3.3% on a 30-year fixed. That is an all-time low for the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So don't overlook some of that stuff. And as you're talking with buyers, or maybe people have cold feet about moving forward, it really is a blessing and a saving grace. And I think perhaps most importantly, these low rates are offsetting or combating some of the harm to affordability that we've seen from rising prices. So sometimes rates can offset that. Another potential positive for buyers, especially at the affordable end, are they taking advantage of less foot traffic and less competition? It's a less competitive market. It's not to say there aren't multiple offers on, turnkey properties in good school districts and near places where people want to be and workplaces. Although maybe if we're all going to be commuting, or a good chunk of us are going to be telecommuting, I should say, maybe how we think about the importance of location could change a little bit. Perhaps those stimulus checks are really just doing the trick, or are we just getting stir crazy? Do people suddenly need a home with 2 master bedrooms or 4 home offices? I know that's funny, but it's also sort of a real consideration. Is this all an overreaction? Well, it wasn't worse because we stayed home. So let's keep that up to the extent possible. Okay, so sort of segmenting our market into 3 meta categories. We have affordable, middle market, and luxury. Maybe I'll flip these around the order. So on the affordable side, we still have these younger buyers, many of whom were unfortunately impacted by some of the job losses we've seen. A lot of those came by way of leisure and hospitality. So, maybe the affordable segment could have some challenges as a result. Luxury, we've talked about the wealth effect, this perception, depending on where your assets and your wealth is, there's this perception that, I feel wealthier, my portfolio's up, I'm willing to make an investment on a luxury home, whether that's 750K plus or $1 million plus. So this wealth effect can really affect confidence in spending in that segment. And, I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but just think of someone with, just hypothetically, someone has a net worth of around $3 million. If stocks were down 30%, well, now they could be worth $2 million. So maybe they had intended to buy $1 million home in cash, or at least put a $500,000 down payment toward a $2 million home, so you don't have mortgage insurance. And so the math around the jumbo can change a little bit. So we're watching that segment and just thinking about how some of the changes we're seeing in the economy and in equity markets can affect these buyers in this segment. So that sort of leaves the middle market, right? So I don't want to say boring, but typical salaried professionals, business, just business analysts, professionals, marketing, what have you, folks who can work from home. Perhaps they have growing families, and we're seeing some new household formations. So a lot of these folks are still shopping and are still getting deals done. So we'll kind of keep talking about that a little. So kind of going back to that, this segment, that affordable segment, we do see maybe a lot of would-be buyers in that segment, prospective buyers in that segment may not have a high school degree or a high school degree or GED equivalent and under. And, unfortunately, we can see a lot of the job losses, March job losses, a lot of those hit this community with a high school diploma or GED equivalent and less. So we definitely see a disparate impact there. I won't spend too much time here, but, sometimes people ask, members, the media, the public, people ask, what share are first-time home buyers in the overall market? We can see maybe the average is maybe about 36 or 38%. We had some 42, right? We've seen some 33 and 34 lately. When the whole market went on sale in 2009 and 2010, actually half of all buyers could manage to be first-time buyers. So first-time buyers were 5 out of 10, 1 out of 2 buyers. Now they're more like 1 out of 3 or 33 out of 100. These are the same things. As prices have risen, people have to wait, a little bit longer, and first-time buyers are making up a little bit of a smaller share of the overall market. Well, it makes sense then if we think about the median age of those buyers, 32 down to 30, when home prices went on sale, right? Younger buyers were able to enter the market. And then we saw the age increase to 31 and then to 32, and most recently up to 33. Yeah, here I've just kind of plotted both of those just to show you guys there's a little bit of an inverse relationship. As first-time buyers are making up a slightly smaller share of the overall buyer pool, we're seeing they're getting a little bit older as they wait. There's a shocker. It turns out most people age roughly 12 months every year. Me, I get about 18 months older every year. So here we are, millennials living through their second once in a lifetime or once in a generation.
David.
Yeah.
Sorry, it looks like we had a question come through. It was probably a few slides back, but asking about if the showings in person and virtual, is that showings in person and virtual scheduled by showing time?
Yes. Such an excellent question. And yeah, that's really a good one. Is that Michelle who asked that? Thank you, Michelle. So yes, all of our showings numbers will include virtual as long as they go through the showing time system. So everything that's booked, every appointment, every showing appointment that's scheduled within that showing time system within North Star, we're able to capture. If it's a phone call, if it's an agent to agent type thing, we won't capture that. But I think we're doing a pretty good job at capturing the majority, or maybe I should say, North Star and the showing time system is doing a pretty good job at capturing that. Thanks, Ann, and thanks, Michelle. So, right, second once in a generation economic collapse, and they're giving each other elbow bumps. Well, millennials finally stopped going out for avocado toast, so we have to assume they can all suddenly afford a house. All of this leads me to a theory, right? If the top and bottom could be softening or could be a little bit weaker, perhaps the middle market will perform the best. So let's see if we're still tracking on that. So let me just go back a little bit into history to show you guys what's happened. I think this is a really telling, a really illustrative way to kind of show this. So here's 330, that last week of March versus, I guess, the second to last week of March. All segments down, right? The most dramatic declines in showings, of course, occurred in this luxury segment, 800 up to 1 million, especially 1 million plus. We did see declines in the, say, 250 up to 350 range here, that were a little bit above the average for the overall market. But again, pretty interesting. We see these middle market ranges, maybe there's some first-time buyers that can stretch to 350 or 375. And I think there's also some move up, the second home, the move up market, maybe moving from, city of Minneapolis or Richfield or St. Louis Park, maybe out to a Blaine or a Lakeville, if folks are doing that. So we did see the least declines, the smallest declines occurred in those middle market ranges. All right, so fast forward that maybe that second week of April versus that first week, mostly that first week of April. Here we see some up, some down, some up, some down, couple up, one down. So not really a clear picture. And then this is this is where things really changed. We really noticed. Well, I don't know if I should use the word turnaround or rebound, but we really noticed these increases across the board. Really beginning that week ended 419 versus that week ended 412. So we see really notable gains across the board. 50% increases in showings is really a huge number. Think of 500 to 750 or 1,000 up to 1,500 showings. So pretty big gains here. And then, we'll be talking about this a little bit. Just be careful with some of these luxury segments. When they're hard hit early on, sometimes they can kind of snap back a little bit. But, maybe it went from, I don't know, 20 showings to 38 showings. So those 18 showings can create a 90 or 95% increase. So we'll see some sort of wonky movement here. Sort of in these three segments. Okay, so fast forward to the week ended 426. Again, we see pretty much across the board increases in showings, minus this 250,000 up to 300,000 segment. Middle market ranges seem to be up the most here, that 300, maybe up to 500. So think of a 325, a 350K home, maybe a 4.25. We saw pretty nice gains in showing activity there. Again, our friends in the luxury market above $1 million showing a nice 42% gain, but that's from fairly suppressed levels in the baseline period. Okay, we're getting to our most recent number. This is May 3rd versus the week ended April 26th. Again, nice across the board gains. So notice here, you guys, we actually saw a decrease in that 250 to 300. And now, let's see, it was the second strongest gain for that more recent week. Not the most recent week, but, that week ended May 3rd. Here we did see a little bit of a pullback in million plus. So here's our most recent number. The week ended May 10th, so this is pretty recent. And again, we see almost across the board gains minus that 300 to 400K segment. So maybe some of you could be surprised by that. But again, week to week, there's some volatility and we can't always think as one week goes, so goes the whole market. All right, let me pause here for a second. I see someone's asking what's causing the drop in showings in that 250 to 300. I think they answered their own question. I think there is a lack of inventory. There's a lack of supply there. So it's hard to see, strong gains in showings and contracts. If you had, let's say you had 1,000 active listings under 300K last year, and now you only have 750 active listings under 300K or 250K, well, there's going to be fewer showings because there's fewer listings. So I think that's definitely a good point. But I also think, let's think back to what we discussed about, potential buyers in this segment and being more impacted by the job losses. Again, you see some of that coming back, and maybe some folks who would have been in this segment, perhaps they've shifted to this segment, maybe even this segment. But I know there's a lot of salaried professionals who are shopping in this segment and this segment as well. So, we do see some numbers, a pretty clear pattern here, but every now and then we'll see, I guess, a wonky data point. So I guess I wouldn't read too much into it, but, we have some ideas of what could be causing some of this. Good question. So this is one of my favorites, why we love data and really why we do what we do. So let me just kind of capture the overall trend here. So early on, all segments down across the board to varying degrees. Second, fast forward a week, some up, some down, some up, some down, some up, some down. Not really a clear picture. So everything down, a little bit of a mix. Now everything up, right? And then more recently, not our most recent data, but now we have kind of more normal, more historically consistent gains. So everything down, kind of a mix, everything up, and maybe more normal increases. So again, we can really track the change here, you guys, sort of this pivot point, an inflection point. Again, I'm really reluctant to say we're out of the woods or the worst is behind us. So I won't say that, but I will say we've gone from across the board declines to across the board gains. And that really is encouraging. So just a note on showings. I have some friends who are builders and some partners in that new construction, that builder industry who we talk with fairly regularly. So we've been hearing from them, builders are saying that even though showing traffic is down, it tends to be a higher quality buyer and a more motivated buyer. So perhaps that's what's driving days on market down, when agents don't have to juggle, some lowball offers and work through all that. So it seems like the true qualified buyers are still there, but some of the fringe buyers or the looky loons and some of those folks, perhaps they've dropped out a little bit. And maybe that's a surprising dynamic for some folks. Okay, so sticking on showing activity, I know we're doing a lot of showings, but it's the best leading indicator that there is. So a showing happens before a pending sale, which happens before a closed sale. So again, it's really good to track these because it's the earliest indicator that we have. So for that week ended 4/12 versus 4/5, again, some gains, some losses, some gains, some losses. 4/19, this is once again where we really see our fairly dramatic gains. This seemed to be a turnaround week. We won't say the worst is behind us, but this did show pretty robust gains across the board. No segment, every single segment gained in showings from this week to this week. Fast forward a little bit, mostly up, I guess a couple down. Week ended 5/3. Again, everything up, I think with the exception of $1 million plus. So our luxury market kind of doing interesting things again. But remember, guys, it's a pretty thin market. I do want to reinforce that. Here again, we see some of our largest gains. In fact, definitely our largest gains in these middle market ranges. So is this confirming some of our middle market theory? Here's our most recent numbers. Week ended May 10th. Again, gains across the board minus one segment, that 300 to 400 segment. Just to kind of track this in a similar way to what we did with the week-to-week percent change, I just want to show you guys, again, kind of a mixed bag. Everything up for that week ended 4/19. Maybe a little bit of a mixed bag again, and now virtually every price range is up once again. So it's just nice to track the evolution of this. And again, this is why I love what we do, and I'm so proud of what we do at MAR, because this really paints a picture for members, for consumers, for media, really across the board, to get everyone on the same page. So just looking quickly at the share, so we've looked at the year-over-year change, we've looked at the growth in overall numbers, but now I want us to take a peek at sort of the market share of the various segments in the overall showing number. So the way to read this is 24%, or roughly 1 in 4 showings for the week ended 5/3 occurred in this under 200,000 market. A little more than 1 in 5 showings occurred in this 250 to 300K market. A nice gain here in that 300 to 400. Even though we've seen some declines, we have seen a growth in the share. And then interestingly, a little bit of a decline in 800 up to $1 million, and a little bit of a decline in 1 million plus. So that's 5/3. Here again, we see nice growth in those middle market ranges. Here's our most recent data for the week ended May 10th. Not a ton to write home about, not a ton to report. Again, roughly 24%, roughly 20% for some of our more affordable segments. Did see some growth in million plus from 0.85 up to just about 1% of overall showings. So, roughly 1 in 4, roughly, these two are roughly 1 in 5 versus 1 in 100 showings occurring on million plus properties. So I already kind of gave you guys a little bit of a hint, but I think about this a lot. We think about this a lot. There's a life cycle to a listing. First, it's a new listing. Then it's an active listing. Then people schedule showings on those active listings. Eventually, hopefully, you'll get a signed contract. You'll become a pending sale with an accepted purchase agreement. And then, of course, not a guarantee, but there's a pretty good chance you'll close as well. So new to active, to a showing, to a pending, to a closing. Let's take a look at new listings. This is straight from our weekly report. If you just go to mplsrealtor.com, you guys will see the weekly report right there. So you guys have access to this. Here again, on the seller side of things, in terms of new listings, we saw this sort of peak for the year, or this high for the year so far, maybe that first week of March. Then we saw a decline, and again, almost kind of right on time here, right on the money. Maybe almost 311 versus 411. About a month later, we sort of see, maybe a turnaround for now. Maybe it's permanent, maybe it won't be, depending on, a lot of talk about second waves and whatnot. So just something to think about there. And let me do one more, and then it looks like we've got another question. So pending sales, shifting over to the demand side of the picture here. Again, year ago activity in gray versus current year activity for 2020 in blue. Here again, we can see pending sales kind of hit their max, their height for the year so far, mid-March, Pi Day 3.14. You can't have a better setup there, guys. And then again, 3.14 versus maybe 4.14 or maybe 4.18. So on 418, that's when we kind of saw that turnaround. And, interestingly, yeah, I mean, you can kind of see a little bit of an inflection point here. So nice gains here. We've had 2 weeks of confirmation of a little bit of an uptrend for now. And you guys can also see we are starting to close that gap a little bit. And that's a good thing. Let me just hop back to pendings. Again, we're starting to close the gap a little bit. I think sellers can do a better job. We'll see what happens. Okay, let's pause here. Looks like David's asking, shift happens, but will it continue to happen? Pending sales down about 20% last month. May sales volume down, but would you expect that to improve as the showing volume has improved? I would say yes. I would say, again, because showings are a pretty reliable, a pretty high quality leading indicator for demand, I would say that as showings have reached, a new high for the year, I would expect pendings to follow and closings to follow. I don't know if that'll be next week, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 6 weeks, or 2 months, but I do expect that to happen. So great question, David. David is one of my fellow data nerds. You know what they say, nerds of a feather have to flock together, especially nowadays. Okay, so let's shift gears over to inventory, or the number of homes for sale, or the number of homes that are listed under active status. A couple ways to kind of think about inventory. So again, current activity versus the year ago period. We can see this is actually pretty exciting. For the first time since the downturn here, we've actually seen a little bit of a gain in active listings. So maybe that's a surprise. So here's some surprise faces. Finally, folks, a little bit of a gain in inventory. We've got some of the greats here, especially Chris Farley. The good ones die way too young, don't they? Okay, new listings here. To be honest with you guys, I almost prefer this visualization to the last few, because I just love how not only does it put 2020 in context with 2019, but because 2019 was sort of a wonky year with weather, and you can see that here kind of below all the other years, but eventually, it kind of got back to these last few years. 2020 is, of course, different. Again, what I think is so important is once we saw that mid-April turnaround, we have seen nice, reliable growth, maybe a little bit of volatility. I want to mention this we can chalk up to Mother's Day, so kind of lower activity as we're celebrating all the terrific moms out there. And it was a pretty cold weekend last weekend, so I think that held back some activity. Nice uptrend here. Can we sustain it? I believe so. I think everyone's hoping so, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so that's new listings. Now we're talking pending sales again. 2020 in black here versus 19, 18, and 2017. So, all the 17, 18, and 19, you can kind of see this trend. Pretty reliable, nice clustering, maybe kind of range bound here, I'd even say. Interestingly, 2020 was performing the best for this week in a good stretch of January and a decent stretch of February. 2020 was looking pretty darn strong in terms of signed contracts, accepted offers, until, of course, the whole world changed and we had a pandemic. Then we saw a downturn, and here again, since mid-April. So look at this, guys. mid-March, this is when you kind of see this change, kind of maybe, I don't know, 16th, 17th, or 18th of March. And then we kind of hit that bottom, maybe 15th, 16th, 17th of April. So you really can't make that stuff up. Pretty interesting timing there. And here again, we seem to be on an uptrend with pendings. I think we can sustain it. I hope we can. It'll depend on a lot of factors. So this one shows the change in new listings from week to week. Again, we see some interesting things happening with million plus. Pretty strong gains there, but again, that's from pretty low levels initially. It's nice to see some gains in these affordable segments. This is what buyers want, more listing activity in these affordable segments. Smallest gain came by way of $500,000 up to $750,000, only a 1% gain. I don't want to dismiss the fact that new listings were up across the board to varying degrees, but seller activity was up across the board. That's a good sign. How about pendings for this week ended May 10 versus May 3rd? So here we do see a 50% pullback, maybe in this low luxury segment, or maybe we can call that the entry luxury bracket, the entry level for luxury. I know there's some $600,000 homes that feel pretty luxurious to a lot of people, but overall, maybe we call this our entry level luxury segment. Our overall entry level, maybe 250 to 350. We're seeing some decent gains there. I think it is encouraging that most of our gains came by way of these three segments, sort of the under $500,000, homes priced at or below $500,000. That's where, I shouldn't say most, that's where all of our gains came from in terms of pending. So this shouldn't be surprising, guys. A lot of the demand is in these segments. And it's also not surprising we're seeing a little bit of a pullback in these segments. Overall, we're up 6% because so much of our activity occurs in these price ranges. So think of it as, it almost has a gravitational pull. So even if you see activity up here, the bulk of our activity happens here. So you'll see, as goes these segments, it tends to influence the overall picture quite a bit. And remember, I think our median is about 290, 295. I think for April, we actually hit 305. For the first time, our median sales price in the metro is over $300,000. Again, interesting timing on that. So a little bit of a different visual here. Here we're comparing this. I believe it's the 18th week of 2020. That's the week ended May 2nd, versus that same 18th week of May 2019, which is the week ended 5/4. Some of you may be saying, well, these aren't identical, but they actually are the same weeks, even though the days are a little different. And remember, because we have a week, we always have all the weekdays, all 5 weekdays, and both of the weekends, where we do see, typically we see increased activity, showings, new listings, offers across the board. So, all right, pretty interesting. We tend to see the slightest declines. Maybe you can think of this as the best performance or the least bad performance, again, in some of our middle market ranges. So we seem to be confirming some of our middle market theory here. Guys, this is a pretty thin market, a 77% pullback. Already, this was a shrinking market. It's just really hard to find product there. And you're competing with investors who have cash sometimes, or oftentimes they're pretty small, 500 or 600, 700 square foot condos. So this is a wonky segment. Also, I'm going to do something a little bit different here, guys. This 52% decline, well, let's look at the actual data. It's from 42 new listings that week compared to 20 new listings the more recent week. So, from 22 fewer new listings, that's a 52% decline. Here again, you guys, 44 down to 10, it looks pretty extreme, but we're only talking about 34 fewer new listings. So sometimes it's useful to sort of ground ourselves in the actual raw numbers. I don't usually show a table of numbers because I think it's not the best way to visualize data, but sometimes it makes sense. Okay, let's do that same comparison for that same period, sort of the more recent week in 2019 versus that same week in 2020. See fairly dramatic losses in that 150 up to roughly 200 segment, 200K segment. Again, we see a notable decline in million plus. Interesting gain here in 750 up to a million. But you know, a 3% decline in homes priced between 350 up to 500. This is not a large decline, even 6%. 45% is a pretty large decline. 40% is a pretty large decline. 3, 4, 5, 6%, you know, not large declines there in those middle markets, those middle market ranges. So again, let me just show off the actual raw data table here. Start with this interesting 42% gain, but what was it, from 8 new contracts, 19 up to 27? So a whole 8 extra pending sales or signed contracts gave us that 42% gain. You know, this is more dramatic, obviously, 150 down to about 80. We can see what's happening there. And then again, in this also very thin segment, you know, this is pretty interesting, guys. 20 for under 120K and also 20 for over $1 million. So these are our thin segments on the extreme affordable end, and, you know, I guess the extreme or the luxury end. So 20 minus 4 down to 16, 4 out of 20, there's our 20% decline. So let me just quickly show some March numbers, and then we'll pivot into show some March numbers, and then we'll pivot into April. A quick reminder, the first half of March did not equal the second half of March, as we've seen. So I've refreshed these. I know I think I showed these last week, but I've refreshed them to reflect all status changes, you know, new, under contract, you know, canceled or expired. We've reflected all those with this more recent data. So again, middle market ranges up 33% for homes priced at roughly 300,000, 275, 325. That's where we see the biggest gain. We see a loss in one of our luxury segments. We also see this decline in a couple of our more affordable segments. So that's new listings, shifting gears over to pending sales. Again, we see these most notable gains in those middle market ranges. So I think our theory is holding water here. You know, with new listings, we see a little bit of this normal curve. Even with pending sales, we see a little bit of this normal distribution. It's a normal distribution. Don't get spooked. It's not a paranormal distribution. Haha. Okay, a little bit of a warning here, friends. Viewer discretion is advised. There are going to be some fairly dramatic changes that you'll see with the April numbers. So please don't spit out your coffee on your keyboard. New listings. Oops, wait a minute. Hang on, guys, 1 second. I want to, I forgot really quickly. Let me see if I can, let me just add an animation here. Let's just make that thing appear. Okay, let me try that one more time. Okay, there we go. So April 2020 compared to April of 2019. And let me see if I can get my laser back here. Sorry, folks. Okay, so again, we see our slightest decline, our smallest decline for April of this year compared to April of last year occurred in that 350 up to 500 segment. So a $375,000 home, a 400,000 or 4.25. That's where we see our slightest declines, down about 8%. Again, our more dramatic declines happen in our extreme affordable end and in our luxury end. So again, we kind of see a little bit of a normal type curve here. Although, yes, it's all below zero. Middle market, again, 44.9, right? That's from 185 down to 102. And you guys can kind of see how things look across the board. Here's that 350 to 500, about 1,600 down to, I don't know, about 1,480 or 1,500. Not a huge dip there. So down only about 8%. Just thinking about the volume, you guys, I know we've said this, but look at the volume in this roughly 200 up to 500 segment. This is where the bulk of our volume occurs. So again, little bit of a normal distribution here. This time it's kind of sideways. This time it was sort of horizontal. Darn it. I'm sorry, guys. This is my mistake. I want to, let me just do one quick animation. I really thought I did that, so apologies. Let's try that one more time. Next time I'll be better, I promise. Okay, new listings, the raw data. Okay, so here we go with pendings. Here again, folks, we see fairly notable declines as we enter the luxury brackets, fairly notable declines in our extreme affordable brackets. And you can't make this stuff up, guys. We see our slightest declines in these middle market ranges, our bread and butter ranges. Here again, let's take a look at the raw numbers. We can definitely see the bulk of activity in this roughly 200 up to 500 ranges, in these 200 up to 500 ranges. 22% decline from 1350 to about 1050. You know, not a huge decline, but, you know, definitely a decline. You know, let's skip InfoSparks for now. If we have time, we'll get back to it. So I just want to talk about some of the shifts that we've seen happening, shifts in shopping and how we do pickup, whether food or other things, how we think about shared spaces and common spaces in rental and condo developments. I'll just say, you know, we've been cooking a lot, and I think my Ninja coffee maker does a pretty good job versus spending $7 on a Frappuccino or whatever at Starbucks or Caribou every day. You know, and thinking again, I know we mentioned this, but about commuting versus working remotely, I think we'll see some more permanent shifts regarding that. You know, trust in our ability to get critical resources, in our leadership. You know, whether state, you know, national, local level, are we doing enough? Are we protecting our vulnerable populations? You know, how does this change moving forward? You know, fear. Someone said the handshake is over. I'm not convinced that's true, but somebody said it. And then some of our political challenges. You know, we're already pretty polarized. You know, as we think about our debt, you guys, our debt has gone from about 21 trillion. I think when this is over, we'll be at about 28 trillion. I think we'll do 6 to 7 trillion in relief, and that'll get added on top of our 21 or 22 trillion in outstanding national debt as it is. So my spidey sense, my math tells me 21 trillion up to 28 trillion is a 33% increase in our national debt. Pretty extreme. Let me also say this. I talk with a few different economists around the country somewhat regularly, and what some of them are saying, you know, although yes, I think everybody shares this concern over unsustainable debt loads, but now really isn't the time for that to be the number one concern. I think the bigger issue is preventing us from sliding into depression. And I think we are doing an okay job at that, but I do think that has to be priority number one. All right. So how will you guys deal with change, right? How will you reinvent yourselves? How will you adapt your business and market your services? And will you be communicating with clients any differently? How can you become or remain the trusted voice and advocate for home ownership, for your clients, for their best interests? Do not ask, how do we do what we're doing, but instead try to ask, how might we or how will we do what we're doing in a different world? Okay, so I've got some interesting ones, a couple new ones for you guys that I think you're going to like. I hope you're going to like. We've been getting some questions on, you know, how shall I say this? Some people think that the condo is dead, right? And that everyone's going to be leaving the city and everyone's going to head out to the suburbs as a result of this. I just don't think that's accurate. And the survey actually confirms that that is not accurate. It sort of contradicts that assumption or that theory. So have your clients change their neighborhood preferences due to COVID? 94% of agents responded no to this NAR survey. No, the search criteria is about the same. So 94%, vast majority. Okay, so 5% have said, okay, maybe I will think less about city or downtown and a little bit more thinking about the suburbs. And then interestingly, actually 1% said, I want to leave the suburbs and actually move into the city, into downtown. So 94, 95% having no change. That's pretty compelling to me, quite compelling. Okay, so, you know, just a couple more slides on the economy, and I'll even show you some from Dr. Lawrence Yun, PhD, the economist, the chief economist at NAR. So the implied unemployment rate by market, some of the highest rates. You guys, you can't make this up. Vegas, Orlando, LA, Orange County. Cleveland is kind of interesting. And then Houston's in there just because of the turmoil we've seen in energy markets with a lot of these Houston, Galveston, even Dallas, Fort Worth, Metroplex, maybe El Paso to a lesser extent, but a lot of these kind of Gulf cities, and Louisiana. Don't forget Louisiana, also an energy, also a state highly dependent on energy. But the rest of these are plain and simple leisure and hospitality. We know that segment was hard hit, as we saw. So Vegas, MGM, Bellagio, right, everything. You see lower occupancy rates, so you should expect to see job losses and higher unemployment levels. Who has the slowest, the smallest, or the lowest rate, the lowest risk? Here we are, folks, Minneapolis. Also, our friends in Salt Lake, Richmond, DC, and Nashville. Kind of surprised to see that Charlotte isn't on this list. I know Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham have been sort of leaders in a lot of ways. So let's watch for listings to increase in the coming months. This is the question: which of the following are potential sellers working on now in order to get their home onto the market once some of the stay-at-home orders are eased and eventually lifted? All right, so half of them are doing DIY projects now. About 30% are starting their online searches for their new home. About another 23% working with their lender, trying to get a pre-approval letter. 23%, nothing. I'm not doing anything. 22% getting paperwork and learning about the process, and then 9% are doing other things. Some interesting tweets, and this is, I have to cite my friends at Myers Research. Lennox was their sponsor, not our sponsor, but I included it anyway. Trying to buy a home is exhausting, says someone on Twitter, right? This market is so competitive still, I'm just going to cry. Who knew the process of trying to find a house would be so stressful? If I can't find a house by the end of summer, I might just buy a plot of land and build. At my price point, it's about the same cost to build as it is to buy. Go figure, huh? So even in this market, even with the changes we've seen, it is still competitive. We're still seeing multiple offers depending on area and price point and finishes and condition of the home. But we are still seeing a competitive market out there, despite some of the shifts that we've seen. Okay, so shifting gears to consumer expectations, perhaps they're better aligned with the reality. So again, I have to cite my friends at Myers Research for this. And you know what, guys, I think I know this is hard to read, so I think I actually pulled these out. There we go. Hey, I did something right on my slides for a change. Nice. Have any of your home sellers recently reduced price to attract buyers? 73% in early May said, no, I have not lowered my price. So about 3 in 4 sellers have not changed price at all. A little bit less than mid-April, but a little bit more than early April. So blue is early April, gray is mid, and then green is early May. So yes, 17% yes, but by less than 5%. Another 7% yes, but between 5 and 10%. And then you guys can kind of see how that goes from there. Are home buyers expecting lower prices? So this one's interesting. This was an increase. 41% are not expecting lower prices, which is, kind of a good sign if you're a seller, I suppose. But also, I think buyers, 24% expected 5 to 10% price declines versus only 21% now. Again, I think buyers are getting more in touch with reality, and I think they realize that some of those expectations early on, could have been a little bit misplaced. Okay, let's keep going. Forgive me for the quality on this, but this is from the National Multifamily Housing Council. Guys, I was pretty surprised at this. This is really not as bad as I thought it would be, and many thought it would be. Rent payment, right? Percentage of rent payments made. So April of last year, 83%. May of last year, about 82%. April of this year, 78%. But May of this year, 80 and a quarter. So when you really compare May to May, it's not that much of a decline. So, I know sometimes the relief checks and whatnot can help. But remember, this is only perhaps 1 month. If folks were laid off in March or April, this is really only 1 month. So, I think more folks have 1 month's rent saved up versus 2, 3, 4, or 5 months of rent or mortgage payments saved up, I should add. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This was a pretty ugly jobs report, as everybody expected. So look at the job losses in the March report. We had to adjust the scale. I should say the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Myers Research had to even adjust the scale here. Roughly 700,000 jobs lost. Look at how small that looks now versus the April number, 20 million. This is ugly. There's no other way to say it. I know some of those, in fact, a good chunk of those are temporary. And also, not only were jobs lost, there were very few jobs added, obviously. Some jobs were added depending on the sector, but if you thought this was low, well, look at how small and petty that looks in the context of the April number. Okay, so here's one of my idols, Dr. Lawrence Yun, kind of throwing out some really nice visuals and tables on how we can think about the economy and how we can understand some of the changes that we've seen. I won't go through all of this. You guys will have the slides and the recording. But GDP down about 5%, consumer spending down about 8%. Personal savings up significantly, and actually incomes did rise technically for the first quarter. But remember, a lot of that was Jan, Feb, and the first half of March. So the second quarter will look quite different than the first quarter. All right, sticking with Lawrence, kind of looking at different consumer spending by different segments. Building material and gardening way up. Everyone's home doing more gardening and maybe some DIY projects at home. Department stores down 25%. Sporting and hobby down 25%. Clothing down by over half. Yeah, we won't spend a lot of time here. Unemployment insurance filers. This is total cases, so you guys can see the increase. This is total, but what about new? So there's fewer new cases, but because there are still new, you'll see the overall total still increasing, even though the number of new unemployment filings, it's still way higher than normal, but it is down from where it was in early April. So somewhat encouraging, but obviously still some concerns there. April, non-farm payroll, jobs lost, right? Leisure and hospitality, by far the greatest. This one's interesting. I know some people are going to be confused by this, especially because of the strains on our healthcare system right now. Much of these losses is because of elective procedures, right? So non-essential procedures, have sort of been put on hold. So we do see some losses there. Yeah, it's kind of some interesting information here as well. Unemployment insurance benefits. Again, we won't dive too far into this, but I know you guys have been hearing sometimes people are making more with these insurance than they would working. And that's actually the case. Interestingly enough, that's the case with these darker blue colors. Seems to be the case in sort of middle America, maybe some of the Rust Belt here and maybe into coal country. But actually some of so state unemployment insurance plus the 600, right, minus that average weekly wage. So these guys who are negative are making less with the payments. These guys who are blue positive are obviously making more. So we see the coasts, New York, California, kind of being harmed or getting much less benefit from some of those claims and some of those relief policies than a lot of the middle of the country. $4, right? Here we are, Minnesota, $4, not a huge difference. Okay, I know you are also hearing a lot about inflation, right? Most of the quantitative easing, a lot of these dollars stay with financial institutions, and a lot of them counter bad debt and write-offs. We're really not expecting much inflation at the consumer level, the consumer price index for urban consumers. You guys can see we've been just about 2%. Right, for the longest time. This is what we don't want. We don't want extended periods of deflation. If that new car would cost me $25,000 this year, if we're in a deflationary environment and I think it'll cost $18,000 or $20,000 next year, I'm going to delay that purchase, and that really harms the economy. All right, let me try to be a mind reader before we wrap up. Here's the big question on your mind. How will this impact home prices? In short, I don't know. The long answer is it depends on the three factors that we've been discussing. Here's Lawrence Yun once again, Chief Economist, NAR. He tells us that we can expect more temporary interruptions to sales and listing activity, I would add, in the coming months. But neither Lawrence nor myself are expecting home prices to decline, again, depending on segment. We could see some weakness in million plus. I think we're really unlikely to see any kind of price softening between, I don't know, say 200 and 400,000, or maybe 250 up to 350, or roughly 2 to 4. So just before we wrap up, a few takeaways. Just hopefully some of this stuff will stick with you. This is unprecedented, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, so it's tough to do forecasts, although we do have good data that kind of show us what's been happening. We saw that sharp pullback followed by, a pretty decent recovery. I'd almost even call it a fairly sharp recovery. Maybe that's permanent. Maybe it's just for now. Time will tell. March looked pretty good. 2020 was off to a strong start, as we saw. But the April numbers showed pretty notable declines across the board, as everyone was expecting. So not a surprise there. All price points, property types, and cities, neighborhoods, and zip codes and school districts are unique. We used Metro-wide or MLS-wide data. You have to look at, dig into InfoSparks, dig into our local market updates, so you guys can really be equipped with the knowledge you need to better guide your customers and to provide the best service you can. Where we go from here still depends on many factors, the three that we discussed. Number 6 is an interesting one. Depending on the timing of this all, it is possible that some motivated sellers feel the need to reduce their price in order to chase buyers, and it is possible those price reductions could become comps for their neighbors. It's possible, again, depending on area and price point and property type, I might add. 7 is important, and sometimes that can kind of counteract some of the pressure that we might see from number 6. We're still so undersupplied, right? The 2008 bubble, we had an oversupply issue. Here we are, 2020, we have an undersupply issue, especially for affordable properties. So I think that means we're pretty unlikely to see price declines. And as we've seen, the luxury side of the market, the luxury end has seen more dramatic impact and more dramatic declines compared to other segments. And with that, I want to say thank you guys so much for joining us. It really means a lot that you'd spend some time this afternoon. So thank you so much. I also want to say thanks to our sponsors for their support: Bell Bank, North Star MLS, Royal Credit Union, and Supra. Some of you know, but some of you may not, a recording of this webinar will be available on our COVID page on our mplsrealtor.com website. Please do join us next week at this time for the latest updates. We'll have new data for you guys. I know you're all thirsty for the latest charts, as am I. As you know, registration is required, and the link is on our homepage, although they're obviously free. So check the website, mplsrealtor.com. And if there are no other questions, I want to say have a great day, and thanks again for joining us.
Awesome job, David. Thank you for all of that great information. And it looks like we're not seeing any more questions come through. So.
All right, we're looking pretty good. Should we leave it at that?
Sounds good. Thanks again, David.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.